I can do this. Anybody can do this.
And I'm telling you,
It's like it does work. When I tell people, like if you tell the newcomer, it's like it's going to get better. They have no idea of what you're talking about because they never experienced it getting better. And that's why I try and show people where the fight is in the beginning. It's like you're not going to feel better in the beginning. If you're anything like me and you stop your substance, life gets worse for a minute.
yes.
And like in order to make it start to get better, you have to understand where the fight is. And once you understand where the fight is, you start to get traction. And over time, it's like you can see the people that were successful. They're the helicopters flying around in the room. The guys that obviously have friends, they have families, they've got cars. You know, I was a very low bottom drunk. Yeah.
Welcome to Pesci's Recovery Corner. This is a recovery podcast where we talk about all things recovery. Recovery from what? Recovery from addiction, recovery from alcoholism, recovery from mental health. Before we get started, if you'd be so kind, if you are watching us on YouTube, please subscribe or like or share. And also, we'd love to hear the comments. You know, talk about whatever you feel when you're watching our podcasts. I have a very special guest today. His name is Jeff. Jeff, welcome to the corner.
Thank you.
I've known Jeffrey for many, many years now. Good friend. Lots of personal struggles, but you know, you're back on the wagon.
Right.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit, Jeff. Let's go into your past. Let's delve into that thing and see where were you born, raised, all that jazz.
I was born in Texas. I was adopted at birth. I moved from Texas to Louisiana.
How old were you when you were adopted?
0.
Okay, so she got you when you were a baby.
Yeah, she got me when I was a baby. She's the only mother I've never ever known. She's an amazing mother.
Okay.
My dad was a piece of work, but that's a different story.
But it was mom and dad that came together or had you together, like brought you into the house?
Yeah, they adopted my sister first, and then they adopted me second.
And was your sister from the same parents or different?
Different parents.
Okay. And growing up, you were born in Texas but moved to Louisiana almost immediately?
Yeah.
All right. And then you grew up in Louisiana?
I grew up in Louisiana.
Which part?
Shreveport.
Okay, Shreveport. And growing up out there, you know, was it tough? Was life tough?
No, life wasn't really tough until my parents got divorced when I was 4, and my best friend, which was my sister, and my mom, and to my perception, just like disappeared. And it was like me and my dad, and he wasn't a very loving, nurturing guy.
So you live with dad?
I lived with dad, and until about the 5th grade. And in the 5th grade, they moved to Albuquerque, like out in the desert. And I hated it there. So I one day I was like, I want to go back home. And my mom was like, you can come home. And then when I moved back to my mom's, I started having like behavior problems.
Okay, before we get into the behavior problems. So when they split up, did mom want you to go with her, or why was it decided that you stay with dad?
They decided that the boys went with the boys and the girls went with the girls.
Gotcha. Okay. So then didn't like New Mexico, and then mom invited you to come back with her.
I didn't like my stepmom at all. And I didn't like the living, like it was me alone in a giant house. And I remember feeling alone, empty, afraid. They didn't give me much love or attention. And and then like all throughout, I was disciplined very heavily by my father. My sister and my mom were at lunch one day, and they figured out that my dad was really aggressive with me, and they called me, or I got in touch with them, and they were like, oh, by the way, you know, your dad used to beat you up when you were a kid. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense.
Well, you didn't know?
No, I didn't know. And I was 4.
You didn't remember that dad used to be abusive with you?
I had no idea. I always felt some sort of fear in a bunch of different ways, but I never was able to connect it. And
gotcha.
When they told me, then it connected.
Okay. So it was kind of stuff that you probably just blocked out.
I assume so, yeah.
Or you were just so young, it was hard to remember.
It was probably more of a lot of blocking out.
Yeah, I understand that. I can relate. All right, so then you moved back to mom's at how old?
I was in the 6th grade.
Back to Louisiana?
Yeah, back to Shreveport.
And sister was there too?
My sister was there too, but we had already been estranged. Like we had been apart for so many years that it wasn't like the same connection it was when we were kids. So
Yeah, there wasn't that closeness.
no,
She's younger than you?
she's older than I am,
How much older?
2 years.
All right. And then you said in your adolescent period, became kind of troubled?
I was always insecure. I was like always my objective was to be loved and accepted. And I didn't know how to do that because I didn't really have any instructions. From like when I was younger, the child learns behaviors that do and don't work, and as they grow older, they discard the behaviors that don't work. I never had that learning curve.
Yeah.
So I experienced it much later, and it was difficult at best for me to create, friendships and relationships and know how to do with what, how to have them successfully. I was always like, if it got hard, I would just bail and give up on people. And as a result, I became like a lone person. I had like one really close friend. His name was Jason, which was Jason's ambitions in life were a lot different than most other kids. He was out to get loaded, to use people, and I kind of adopted those traits.
Well, how old were you when you were friends with Jason?
It started in the 6th grade.
Okay. When was the first time you ever used substances?
I was 13.
What'd you use?
A pint of Evan Williams. It was disgusting.
Alcohol.
Yeah, alcohol. And I remember drinking it, and then I remember it's kind of fuzzy, but it made me really sick. I remember sleeping on some girl's flowers that were meant for her father's funeral in the back of a car and catching a basketball with my face. And the next thing I know, I was like throwing up in the front yard.
How'd you get the Evan Williams
I have no idea.
liquor?
No idea.
Don't even remember.
No, it's just like I stumbled across it, and it was it wasn't the freedom I was looking for. I'm never drinking Evan Williams ever again. It was disgusting.
Ever since.
No.
Then was this during school or when?
This was probably my freshman year of high school.
Okay. And question for you, growing up, any bullying or being bullied or anything like that go on in your life?
People tried. I was always like a recluse. I was always like that guy that could be pushed around, and I would allow it to a point, and at one point I would just explode. And one day I got in the fight in the 6th grade, and I really messed this kid up. And I've always been aggressive, but it's Louisiana. You learn how to shoot, run, jump, swim, fight.
Yeah.
And all that stuff. But I was always so desperate for like love and acceptance that I kind of got pushed around a lot.
Okay. And then drug use throughout junior high and high school, or just high school?
No, just high school is where I started having real problems. Like when I went from junior high to high school, it was like I still didn't have the social skills I needed. And it was like a whole new crowd of people. And there was a few friends there that I knew when I was a kid, but again, we were estranged. Like there was always a separation. Like I lost a lot of my friends when my parents got divorced, and I just didn't do well in high school.
Okay. Then when was the first time that you had to address the problems, the being problematic?
I was dragged to treatment when I was 16, kicking and screaming.
Okay. And was it by like two goons that came and took you, or what?
If you call my mom a goon, it was...
Oh, it was
yeah.
No, I'm talking about the people that take the teenagers in the middle of the night to rehab.
No, they tried that once with the tough love, and I had a father figure that stepped in the place of my dad.
Yeah.
And they tried the whole tough love thing, and they wound up staring down the barrel of a 38, and so they quit doing that.
Oh, you pulled the gun?
Yeah, my friend Bubba and I were always, it's Louisiana, so you have access to weapons. When I grew up, America was different.
Yes.
So we had access to weapons, and we were always really responsible with them. And I don't know why I felt threatened, but I had the 38 and it was under my pillow. I could kind of feel the water heating up around me, and I didn't know what was going to happen.
Yeah.
So I had it, and they came to discipline me, and I was like, you MFers can get, and they got out, and they ran away. They were like, he's got a gun. And then the police came and found it, and they took it, and like a bunch of drama went on for a minute. And then
But the time that you first went to treatment, what happened? You were 16. Did you stay sober very long?
I felt like I went to jail, and
How long did you go for?
I was there for a week before I figured out how to commando my way out of it.
And then you escaped
Yeah, I escaped.
and went back home?
No, I went to this guy named Paul. I was like, hey, look, I figured out how to get out of here. And he's like, all right, let's do it. And so we commandoed it past, and we got in the elevator and we left the hospital. And he was like, he stole a car. We took a bus to the mall and he stole a car. And then he was doing some other substances. So I started doing it with him.
Like what?
It was coke.
Okay.
Yeah. And
16-year-olds.
yeah, I went from somehow it's all a blur, but one day I went from pot to coke to other stuff, and it just went from bad to worse to devastating. And I remember sitting on the banks of the Red River, and I was like, I can do this. I can go panhandle, and then do this way and I can live like this, which wasn't true at that point. So I wound up going back to the treatment center, and then they were like, all right, this one's crafty. So they literally locked me up in a ward with like in a cage. And then a couple of days later, my mom came and took me down to Grand Coteau, Louisiana, to go to a halfway house. And it was
As a teenager?
yeah. And that was the last time I was at home for years.
Really?
Yeah.
So mom was with stepdad. You didn't stay at home. You went to the halfway house. Did you stay long?
I was there for about 4 months before I realized that I didn't want anything that these people had to offer.
Took you that long to figure it out?
Well, yeah, and from there, I just learned how to play the game. It's like, oh, I can play this game. I've always been really crafty and really intuitive on how to defeat enemies by just playing their game, and then when they least expect it,
Yep. So as a teenager, though, were you still in high school during that time?
I was in high school. They put me in Beauchesne High School in Grand Coteau, Louisiana. Grand Coteau is like a Chevron and all girls school, and in the halfway house, and it's like rural Louisiana, so there's like swamps and everything everywhere. And
Did you end up finishing high school on time?
I did. My senior year, I kind of like quit and then got my GED,
Okay.
so I could.
But where were you living at that point?
You know what? It's a blur. I was in Lafayette somewhere when I think I got my GED when I was in the halfway house, because when I was going to Beauchesne High School, I couldn't relate. I was still having like problems connecting to other kids, and it was just like, I was finally one day I was like, I'm not going back, and you can't make me. And they were like, well, then you need to get your. And then I went like a week later, and I passed the GED. It's like I didn't even have to study. And from there, I went to another. When they kicked me out of the one I got my GED with, they put me in another one. No, wait, they put me in another one. And when I went to that one, I was in my sophomore year or something. Like, it's such a blur that.
Okay. So did you end up going to the military?
Yes, I did.
This is around your early 20s?
Yeah, my early 20s, I was. From those two halfway houses, I went home for like a month, and then I wound up somehow being homeless. And
Do you mean did you get kicked out of your house?
I don't really remember how that happened. Like, that's how messed up I
You were
was.
just not well.
Yeah, I was not well at all.
But then you ended up in the Army or Navy or what?
The Navy. How that happened was I was in Omaha, Nebraska, and I had been in this, strict kind of like recovery home, and I didn't want to be there. And I went from there to a recovery home. I felt like they cast me aside and they moved me out. And like I was alone, afraid. I still wasn't like emotionally mature. And like I was like, you know what would be the best thing for me would be to like
go and man up and become a military man?
Well, I'm trying to edit this to the point where it would be palatable for the podcast. Well, anyway, I did something and came up with a bunch of money. And I used, and then the guy came to get his rent, and I didn't have it, and he kicked me out. And from there, I was on the streets in Omaha, Nebraska, in the snow. So I learned how to do things that most people do to survive.
You were in survival mode big time.
Yeah, I was in survival mode. And then the opportunity came to where I could join the Navy if I wanted to. And I was like, yeah, that'll be discipline, 3 hots and a cot, and I'll learn how to get things together, and I'll change my life.
How long were you in the Navy?
For a while. I don't really talk much about it, but I'll tell you what happened. Like, there's some things I'll edit out, but they're not palatable. It's like I'm not going to talk about those.
Yeah.
But what happened was I joined to have 3 hots and a cot, and I can run, jump, shoot, swim, fight. And so I was really good at what I did. And I went in undesignated because that got me in faster. And then I would get to pick an A school after boot camp. And I thought, oh, I can do that. Well, when I was in boot camp, they told me that you have to stay for 2 weeks longer unless you have an A school.
Yeah.
And I was not going to do that. I was like, I want out of here because it was like such a turn that I didn't want to have anything to do with it. And so I went to the headquarters, and they had A schools that were open. Like they didn't have the people to fill all the seats. And I found one that was called a quartermaster. It was a nautical navigator. And I was like, cool, I can do that. I can drive the ships, And so they sent me down to Orlando to NTC, and I went through QMA school. And at the end of QMA school, you're given, there's like pictures of ships on the wall from what I remember. And you get like, it goes in order of the class. You get to pick whichever one you want. And I picked one that was like a little bitty boat that had like rocket launchers. And so I had no idea of what this meant or what command it was with, but it was with a different command. And so when you select it, they send your hard card on your information off to the command. And with what happened is I got railroaded into doing something I didn't want to do. They were like, hey, this is a smaller command. And with a smaller command, you have to have 2 jobs. And when they sent my stuff out, everybody else's orders came back the next day. There was like 50,000 people on this base. And then all the next day, it was like me and 4 other people. And I was like, am I in trouble? What did I do? And a few days later, like they made you, it's called smurfing. You go and pick up trash cans and empty stuff.
Yeah.
And a couple days later, like my orders came back, and they called me into the Master Chief's office, and they were like, your orders came back, and they came back with a stipulation. And I was like, well, what does that mean? They were like, with a smaller command, you have to have 2 jobs. And I was like, well, what am I going to be doing? And they were like, you know what, we're going to be, SAR. And I was like, I don't know what that means. And they had like, this was in the time they had the VCR tape. So they put the tape in, and it was like a tape of people doing the craziest crap. I was like, and at the end of the tape, they were like, what do you think? And I was like, I don't want to do that. And they were like, nobody's asking you what you want to do. Pack your sea bag.
Yeah.
And from there, I became like, from a little boy that could be pushed around and was threatened by other people's presence, I became the monster that I tried to diffuse for the rest of my life. And I still have problems with the aggressive part of it.
Still.
Yeah, it's like, but it's a lot different now. It's like I've gone to the professionals and stuff like that and dealt with a lot of the stuff, but some of it still, like I use the doctrine to understand the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous because it's a battle, right? It's the same thing as a linear battle. It's just you have to have a different weapon to fight this battle. And I look at the big book as it's like an assault rifle. It's not really a book. It's also a living, breathing book, which if you have the comprehension to understand what it's saying, it's really descriptive with the way this thing is. Anyway, we'll get into that later.
We will. So after the military, you ended up going to lots of treatment, correct?
Yeah, I've been in like a bunch of different treatment centers. That's where I use the remember when you said everything you do is calculated? Mm-hmm. That it was all calculated. I would go and I would play Peter Pan of the program. I would get clean and I would get some stuff back. And then, when it got too uncomfortable for me, I would bail and then I would go drink.
So throughout your 20s and 30s and 40s, because I met you in your mid 40s, mm-hmm. You've gone to treatment all over America, right?
Yeah, I've been in every major metropolitan area trying to do geographics and to change how I feel inside and stuff like that. When I started trying to get sober was when I was 38. Mm-hmm. And I had been living in the Foxhole.
Well, before we get into that, what's the longest amount of time that you'd ever, in all these treatment episodes and stays, what's the longest that you stayed sober?
And before I started trying, 30, 60, 90 days.
Okay, what about when you started trying?
The first time I started trying, I got 11 months. And met a girl, and she looked good in yoga pants, and like I was like, that's all I ever need, and like there's a few more qualifications come to find out than anything like that. But anyway, so I met her and I married her, and it was
You married her.
yeah, it was a disaster.
Is this the person that you had the kid with?
Yes.
Okay. So you had a son.
No, I had that. The son I met Jody when I got out of the Navy, and I was still that monster, and she saw me as like I wasn't stable enough to have.
So you had a son with her,
Yeah.
with the other lady.
But she took Joey and ran away with him.
Okay.
I didn't meet him until he was 16.
Okay. But this other lady had a kid,
Yeah, and
you still have that kid?
I still have that kid. Joey passed of a fentanyl overdose a couple of years ago.
Yes, I remember. I knew Joey.
Yeah.
Okay, so later on, you after all these treatment stays and episodes and trying to stay sober, even attempting and getting the 11 months, what happened down the line where you ended up living in a foxhole?
Well, my somehow they got an interventionist involved in my life, and he was like, you know what, this is what we're gonna do. This is how we're gonna do it. And I was just like,
And what was this? What state?
This is in California.
Okay.
And they were like, you know, we're gonna cut off all your resources. You know, you're gonna be homeless. And I was still that Navy monster, and I was kind of like, you know what, you guys forget I can live outside. And
So because you had a military background, you had the ability to say, F the world, I'm going to go and do my own thing. And that's why you dug a hole into the ground to live in?
well, being mentally tough is a part of what it is. And how would I explain this? Every time I would get uncomfortable, I'd run, and I wasn't afraid of living outside. I thought, like, throughout the years, I had forgotten everything that the military had taught me until they hired the interventionist, and I wound up back on the railroad tracks drinking.
Who hired the interventionist? Your mom?
Yeah, my mom, his name was, I don't know if I can say it on here, but
Doesn't matter.
yeah, but he was always trying to get me to do something, and I was like, no, I couldn't surrender. I'm not built to
Do you
surrender.
remember his name?
Yes, I do remember his name.
What was it?
It's Richard is his first name, and I'm not going to break his anonymity.
I think I knew who it is.
Yeah, I think you do too.
Yeah.
But we can't.
It doesn't matter.
Right.
I mean, whatever.
Anyway, so I moved out. I went out and I was sitting on the railroad tracks where I'd been frequenting, and I was leaning against a cinder block wall, and there was this big bush above me, and I was pulling on this vine, and it was like, you know how in the cartoons where it goes pink, 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 pink up
Yes.
and well, I was doing that, and I guess I pulled the last support out, and this bush falls, and it falls. It didn't hurt me, but it landed. It was like instantly I was in cover. And like that, from there, all the military files just started loading like the Terminators, like, and I was like, oh yeah, I can live out here. What's the first thing I need? That's shelter, right? So I was like,
Was this in Santa Ana, California?
yeah, this was in Santa Ana on the railroad tracks. At the corner, you know where the Embassy Suites is?
Yes.
There's a train yard behind that, and then where the tracks curve.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I built my first foxhole, which was not military specs.
Did anybody ever come and mess with you for building a foxhole there?
They couldn't find me. The second time they couldn't find me. The first one, I just found 4 railroad ties and a skylight and threw a blanket over it and covered it up with, dirt.
When we talk about a foxhole that you were living in, how deep was this?
This one, the first one was above ground, and the cops raided it and wrote me a ticket and threw me out on Warner Avenue. And then I was like, all right, MFers, let's see if you can really find me.
Mm-hmm.
So I commandoed it back onto the tracks, and I dug 3.5 feet down, 6.5 feet over, camouflaging entrance. And there's nobody. It was there for 12 years. Nobody ever was able to find me.
And was it like a deeper hole that you could go down into?
Yeah, you go underground, and there's like a foot of dirt on top of you. It's camouflaged with the right foliage, which is around you. It had a hatch.
This was a place that you can go retreat to and go hide out in, correct?
Yeah, it was warm at night, cool during the day. I didn't have to share my alcohol. Nobody could find me. I built a storage area, a shower.
How were you having running water down there?
Well, you take a camelback and you put it up in a tree. First of all, you want to be someplace that they can't see you. which is like there was a thick willow bush, and it's like it was in the beginning. It's really uncomfortable to get on there and to dig, but if you've had to do it before, it's like it's a walk in the park for me. I can go out. I could go build one in your front yard.
Let's not think about that.
It's like yeah, but anyway, you take a camelback, you throw it up in a tree. The water will heat it up, and then you have a shower, and then you have like I had like a propane stove. At first, I had a candle, but that wound up exploding underground and catching me on fire. I didn't know that molten wax was explosive, but what I did was I used to have to use candles, and that's what they teach you is if you're underground, a candle can raise the temperature to a survivable temperature.
How long did you live under there?
On and off for 10 years.
Okay, because when I met you, you were in treatment. You were actually in a group that I was running.
Yeah.
And at first you were a little bit intimidated by me. You thought that I had it out for you, but later on we actually kind of developed a friendship. And then I would sit in groups with you and think, well, this guy could pretty much run the groups. It seems like he's pretty treatment inclined. Like he's been a lot of treatment, you can tell.
Yeah.
Especially if it was like a 12-step type of group or something like that. Like you knew the book inside out. But also what I started to learn about you during that time is that you kept wanting to leave treatment. And often if you would, you would either talk in advance about going to the Foxhole or you would just go to the Foxhole and people would come and search for you and try to find you.
Yeah, and they never could.
Okay.
That was the point of the Foxhole.
Yeah. It was your seclusion.
Yeah, it was my safe place.
Your solitude, a place to get away from everybody.
Right.
All right. So psychologically, you think there's something going on there that you would always go back and retreat to the Foxhole? Because you even throughout the years would always talk about, you'd always come get sober for a while. And then you'd say, I just feel like nothing's working, or I don't want to do this, or I just want to go back to the Foxhole.
Fear of the unknown.
Was it like the little boy that was raging and full of anger and just wanting to get away from everything and going back there?
It was the fear of not knowing what was going to happen and not being able to see past the treatment center. It's like all I could see is what was going on. If it wasn't working right then, I didn't have the patience or the faith to summon the courage to let things play out. And I was like, all right, and I would make assumptions. I would like try to predict the future based on the past, which you can't do because like when you get sober, you're a completely different person.
Well, amazingly enough, which I don't see this quite often, is that whenever you would come back after a run, you were quick to want to work a program, quick to want to do some recovery, but quick to also want to get a job. And usually you get jobs that require some education. And I always knew you were educated just by the way that you spoke.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'd get these jobs where, I won't say what kind of jobs they were, but you were usually helping people in the jobs.
Yeah.
There was major requirements for you to be able to be normal, to be able to help people enough in the line of work or jobs that you carried.
Right.
The thing is that in most cases, after having these jobs, whatever they may be, because they weren't always the same job, there was various different jobs, but over a period of time, there was like a switch within you that would change and you'd find yourself back on the streets again. Sometimes not living literally on the streets or in the Foxhole, but often resorting to motels, usually dingy, seedy type of places that weren't really above the board. But like you loved using certain types of substances too. I know there was meth in the mix. I think you've done some opiates, and Xanax and things like that. But definitely crack and alcohol were your major get downs, weren't they?
Well, I wasn't going to say that on here, but anyway.
Whoops.
Yeah. So
that's why I asked you in advance. Is there anything you don't want to talk about?
Yeah. Well. Anyway, I had problems. Alcohol was always a base. And then cocaine in any form was like my drug of choice. And I've had battles with like, if you look back at the span of my entire life, it's like I would switch from one to the other, thinking things would change, not knowing that the problem had nothing to do with what I was using, but how I was feeling.
Right.
So once I got sober when I was sober for 2.5 years, like when I left Florida, when my brother was like, hey, I know how to get sober. And I was like, I've been to treatment before. He's like, this has nothing to do with treatment. That caught my attention and he flew me out there. and he detoxed me in his recliner with little football Xanax.
Yeah.
Like I would vibrate and he would give me one. And then when I could finally stand up, he was like, this is what you do. Go to a meeting and find a guy that has a life like you would like to live and do what he says. And I was like, that's it? And he was like, yeah. And so I went to CA, and I found that guy, and luckily he's really heavy hitter, like stays within the box of the program, which I'll talk about later.
Yeah.
And it started to make sense to me. It still wasn't easy for me to practice, but in that 2 years I went to school, I got an education to do what I do. And everything that
So outside of the 11 months, you actually put together 2.5 years of sobriety.
Right.
And you even took people through the steps.
Yeah. And well, yeah, I found a way to articulate the information in a way that I could understand it so that they could understand it, because
And some of them stayed sober and still are.
yeah, there's a lot of them are still, so 2 are dead, the rest are still sober. Which is like, it has nothing to do with me. It just has.
No, I know it has nothing to do with you because I watched your personal struggles
Yeah.
over even after all that.
Yeah.
I've seen you make tons of attempts at getting sober.
Yeah.
I've seen lots of falling down and bruising knees and getting back up and walking again. And you're the way that you have been.
Yeah.
It's never been anything I've held against you. I always love you no matter what. Even when you're really angry, like the anger comes back when you're like on one.
Yeah.
And I become your enemy. But then later on, you always seem to come back and find me and we reunite like we never left off. You actually normalize quite fast.
Yeah.
Like within a day or two. Well, not more recently, your detoxes are a little more
bit
drawn out.
rough.
You seem like you're like it's starting to affect you and catch up with you. You're also what 50 or so
I'm
now.
50 now.
So something happened more recently.
Yeah.
How many days are you sober right now?
I'm 50 some odd days sober.
Okay. So for those that are listening to the podcast and they can't see the visual, because I'm going to break out the board.
Right.
I want you to tell me a little bit about what happened more recently that you kept telling me I need to get a whiteboard and I want to show you something.
Okay. Well, that starts when one day I was in my Foxhole, and like I used to pop my head up like a little gopher and scan the tracks before I rolled out of my Foxhole, because that's just the smart thing to do. You never want people to know where you're going. And I popped my head up out of the ground like a little gopher, and this voice like I've never heard before, like it was an objective kind voice that harassed me for a couple of years after that, but it was like, hey Jeff, this is not normal. And I was like, well, and then I noticed that nobody else was living in foxholes.
Yeah.
Nobody else had to be careful lighting cigarettes because of their blood alcohol level. It was like, people, I was like, what if it's me? And then I realized that it was me. And a couple years go by, and like this voice was always like, would tell me, hey, you shouldn't be doing that. You should be doing this, and started painting a picture for me. And then like at one point I realized that we all may paint with different colors, but we all paint the same picture. And I was finally got to a point where I was like, that's when I wound up on the phone with Chuck for the last time. That's when I went and I got 2.5 years of sobriety. When I got to 2.5 years of sobriety, there's a couple of walls that I hit. There was like the 6 month and then the 11th month were the two hardest parts. And then at 24 months, it was a brick wall. And the brick wall came from the little deviation from what I'm going to show you in the little whiteboard thing. Mm-hmm. Like the smallest deviation from baseline over time makes a huge gap. And it's called, like in the military, you stick to the basics, because like when you're never going to rise to a challenge, you're going to fall to your level of training. Mm-hmm. And if I'm trained out here and like the basics of battle are down here, I'm going to lose a fight every time.
Yes.
So I stick with the basics. Like the book says, it's clear cut directions. Like I have to understand that is like, that's the battle plan. Mm-hmm. And so I started studying the book. Like, what does it really mean? What are the first 3 steps? How am I going to understand them? How am I going to use them? Like I started to be concerned about Jeff, because
Recently?
This was, you know what? It's simple, but it's not easy.
Yeah.
It's easy when I want something, or I think I need something. If my needs aren't getting met, then that lets fear creep in. This metaphysical being isn't going to meet my needs, so I need to maneuver in some sort of way, like try and fly the helicopter, and I crash it into something, and then I get discouraged, and then it's like, well, this is never going to work. So then I go back and I drink, but I'm not remembering that I can't fly a helicopter. The unmanageability is trying to keep flying the helicopter, to believing that somebody can fly a helicopter is challenging when I can't see what's going on, and then following good orderly direction to learn how to fly a helicopter. That's the first three
Good
steps.
orderly direction.
Yeah, it's like
GOD.
yeah, it's like I noticed when I was a sponsor that word would sting. It'd screw up the whole process. It was like,
For you personally?
no, not for, well, it did for me in the beginning. And then I realized that God is like basically four things for me. It's the gift of desperation, which takes me to the group of drunks, which puts me in good orderly direction, which leads to the God outside of the 12th step, which I experience. It's like that. It's that simple. And
Okay. So if I get the whiteboard right now,
Yeah.
I'm going to hold it here.
Yeah.
I'd like for you to build the diagram that you showed me.
Yeah.
And then obviously you have to erase it and then add on to it, correct?
Right.
All right. So I'll hold it here. And what I would like for you to do is to be able to have the microphone in position so you can still draw
Okay.
and explain so we can hear you.
Okay.
Because there are people that are just listening to this and can't see the diagram.
Okay.
So you might want to take your headphones and turn them the other way around. There you go. So the wire's over there.
Okay. All right.
And then I'll hold this over here. And you can kind of just talk with the microphone by your head.
Okay. Can you
All
hear
right.
me? All right. That might work.
And then here's a pen.
All right. Where's mine? Okay. So here, bring it close.
And there, when you want to wipe it down, there's a thing right there.
Okay, so in the beginning, this is what I had to understand before I started working the steps. This is like you've got the triangle, the circle, and the square, right? There's the 12, there's 1, spiritual square. Okay, so thoughts, feelings, actions. In the beginning, I realized that and this all came to me one day when I was sitting on the railroad tracks, and I was like, why can't I stay sober? And I had my book. I don't have it with me right now, but this is what started to come into mind.
Just speak up a little bit so the mic catches you. But I hear you.
Okay. There's that better?
Much better.
Okay, cool. So I've got my thoughts and my feelings and my actions. And this is where the fight is in the beginning. It's like my thoughts, I notice that my thoughts and my feelings, they influence each other, right? And my actions are like my smallest trait. But this is kind of the cognitive behavioral triangle, which you'll hear in treatment, which is like quantum physics if I don't look beyond what they're saying.
Yes.
They say that
I think you've sat in enough groups to be able to learn about CBT.
Right. It's like that stuff never made sense to me. I never understood I can't remember the groups I went to in rehab. All I know is that this is not Feelings Anonymous. This is not Thoughts Anonymous. This is an action program. And if I'm looking for a battle plan, this is where I start to fight in the beginning. This is kind of rough. So I've got my thoughts and my feelings, which influence each other, and they dictate my actions, right? So if I try and change my thoughts, that doesn't work. My feelings influence everything I do, which is difficult at best. If you can change one of these two, then your life will change. That's a guarantee. I was never able to do that. So I realized that action was my strongest suit. Well, with action comes resistance, because I don't want to do what they tell me to do. That's where the fight is in the beginning, is the resistance to follow an action to change these two. For me, it started out with, make your bed. And I would be like, F you, you make my bed. I pay you to do that. And rehab and all these other stuffs. And then I learned in one of my last treatments, I realized that treatment isn't curement from alcoholism. It's just a stepping stone. If you notice anything about treatment, it's like they'll take you to all these groups during the day, and then they'll tell you to get a sponsor and work the steps and take you to a meeting at night. I noticed that in the beginning, so I realized that my job was just to go to this stuff. I remember one day we did this emotional charades group, and I had to act out desperation, and I kind of did it inappropriately. But anyway, that kind of stuff never really resonated with me. What resonated with me is, all right, what do I have to do to fight off these two, right? Well, with action comes resistance, right? And I noticed that my actions have polarity. There's a plus and a minus, right? I can do the way or I can do it my way. And I've already decided that my way didn't work when I came here. I had no relationships. I think I had one friend, which is my brother, and then you, Pej, and then it was like me and the raccoons out in this hole in the railroad tracks. And so anyway, my actions have polarity. My way doesn't work, but the way comes with resistance because it's changing my ego, my ambitions, my perceptions, and my idea on how I'm going to get better. It's like I go to treatment thinking I know how to fix this problem, when in reality, let's think about what Jeff's accomplished so far, which is like a big fat zero. I wasn't on some winning streak. So all these things have polarity. If you have the right thought, there's polarity on both of these, right? So the art of action is, it's like I have to power. That's where the fight is for me. I have to power through the resistance of doing what the way is versus what my way is, which precipitates me into two fears, right? I have a fear of my way and I have a fear of the way, because this is the unknown. And this way, I know what I'm going to get, which is going to be crap, right? So once I get that my actions is my strongest suit, so that leads me to the fact, oh, okay, well, if the directions are to work the steps, that leads me to the spiritual square over here, which is like steps 1 through 12 are going to give me a spiritual experience, right? It says, and 1 doesn't demand you to believe anything. Step 12 says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. I find that the box represents the box that the sponsor has to stay in. It's like when I sponsor people, I'm just like, I'm not a relationship therapist. I'm not a banker. I'm not anything else other than able. I don't micromanage people. I believe it's like one meeting a day. Not just, there's a whole bunch of different things that the book doesn't really talk about. But the box is the box I operate in as a sponsor. And then I straighten out, physically, mentally, emotionally, and somewhere in the steps. And that leads me to the circle, which is like balance. There's a little bit of bad in the good and a little bit of good in the bad. And from like 25% work, 25% play, 25% program, and 25% fellowship, that leads me to peace. And the peace is my goal. And when I'm peaceful, I can practice love. And that's like chicken scratch on the board. I usually am able to draw it better. But, and this is like the basic thing I had to understand, is like, this is why they call it an action program, because it changes these two. And in the beginning, it's like turning on a water spigot. Like, it's really hard to turn on. But the more I practice doing the right thing instead of what I want to do, the easier it is for this thing to go up. And once it's like a helicopter, then it starts to fly on its own. And it becomes easy to act and to feel and to think like a normal human being, like following this. So that's basically that in a nutshell. That's like the simplified version. That's it. If you want, you can find me on Facebook or anything like that. And if you have any questions, like, I'll be happy. Like, I would actually be honored to help whoever wanted to understand this.
Okay. And what about, did you need to erase it and do something else?
Yeah, I was going to do, like, this is how I...
Was the yin and the yang there?
Yeah, that's the balance.
Well, there it is.
Yeah. So this is how the book says to, like, this. I'm just going to explain it much more than I'm going to draw it. All right. So if you read the book says, on page 30, it's like, we have to concede that our innermost selves that we're alcoholics. That's step 1.
Or addicts.
Or addicts, or whatever it is that you identify with.
Yes.
Okay. And then step 2 says, do I now believe, or am I now willing to believe in a power greater than ourselves? How I made sense of that is like, okay, in biology, they have, like, when you're a zygote, when you're a fertilized egg and you run and you're implanted into the uterus, I might be butchering this a little bit, but the cells start to divide. Around division 240 or so, the cells start to become specialized cells, like a liver cell or a brain cell or a kidney cell. They start to become specialized. And amazingly, these things start to migrate to the part of the body where they're supposed to be. And in biology, they've realized that they can't find the map of how these things do that. They've started to realize that it's a physics thing and not a biology thing. And so it's outside on the electromagnetic spectrum somewhere. That shows me that there's something out here that is mapping these things out. And if I think about it, trees grow to perfection without, directions, right? So that shows me that something is working, that I'm growing somewhere. And that helped me understand what the basic of like my higher power was, is the energy outside. Like that was the basic thing that I could understand. Step 3, we're going to follow good orderly direction to spiritual experience. And that's all it is. People get stuck on step 4. What is that? The gardener's here. Awesome. So, in step 4, it's like when I'm with my sponsees, I've noticed that see, I use, that's funny.
So sorry.
Yeah, and no, it's not a big deal for me. I look at it as like helicopters, right? Step 1 is a 2-part step, right? Say we have a helicopter. Can you fly a helicopter, Jeff? No, I'll kill us all, right? Okay, so if I can't fly a helicopter, that's 1. I'm powerless over flying a helicopter. I can't. 2, the unmanageability part is me trying to fly the helicopter. I keep crashing it, right? Step 2 is like, I was sitting, is like, what, do I believe somebody can fly a helicopter? Yeah, I see them flying around all the time. Step 3 is we're going to follow good orderly direction to the point of where we can fly a helicopter, right? And then we're going to teach other people how to come to their own ideas on how to fly their own helicopter. Anyway, so that's 1, 2, 3. And 4, if my job as a sponsor is to help you create a connection, then like if you have a pipe in between you and your connection, right? And there's all these rocks in it that are keeping you from, and then there's the little bitty rocks and stuff like that. These are all the things, these are the resentments and all that stuff that keep repeating in your mind. Like a resentment for me is that repeating event that brings forth some sort of angry feeling or uncomfortable feeling. So the job of me as a sponsor is to help you clear away some of these rocks. And like I've noticed that you have to make the mission survivable, right? If I'm saying, hey, list your entire life of like, I really don't care if you stole a popsicle from Susie when you were in the 4th grade, or it's like, I don't care about that stuff. What I'm looking for are the big rocks, like, why you lost your family, like why you shot somebody, why you robbed a bank, and all these things. It's like, once we move all the big rocks out of the way, it's like I say the worst 25 first. Let's pick out the worst, because we're looking, it's a moral inventory. It's not like a Catholic confession. And so we clear away some of these rocks in here. And then when at the end of the 5th step, we have 25 examples of character defects that we have to take to the 7th step. What is the 7th step? Okay, so you've got lust and hate, right? In the middle, you've got love. What is a shortcoming? Okay, so if you put that on a continuum, love, and this is like you or me. And what the shortcoming is most alcoholics fall either on the lust side or the hate side or something. And in the middle, you've got the character you were meant to be, right? This is the shortcoming right here, is what you're actually asking this metaphysical being to remove. And this is going to be done and just like the mapped out, but he's going to use like your character defects and your character assets in all situations to achieve his will. And he's going to remove these on his time and not your time. So this is kind of like, and now you know better, you're going to try to do better. And as you know better, you're going to do better. And then step 8, we have that when we did step 4, that's our basic list of the 25 major amends that you have to make. Step 9 is a lifetime affair. Step 10 is basically a spot check inventory. Step 11 is none of my business as a sponsor. That is completely on you. And step 12 is a command. It says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried. Not if it was convenient, not if I wanted to, not if anything else. It says we tried when the opportunity presents itself to bring forth experience, strength, and hope. That is my job. And that is the summation of what I teach is the 12 steps. It's like, it's not, because it's like, it's a surgical, it's a sniper shot, and it's the baseline. And if you notice in the rooms, there's lots of newcomers. There's maybe a couple 30 days. There's maybe 160-day, or in like 90 days are few and far between. It's because the program has like basically almost 45 days to get you some relief. And like if I'm not doing this and helping you get on this side of step 12 and getting your connection, then the mission's not survivable. It's like people will falter, especially if they get clogged up writing in 1, 2, or 3 when there's no writing according to the book. And it's like, and then step 4, you have to cap it. It's like a Pez dispenser. It's like there's always going to be something. And the reason why this is possible is because when you get through the 12 steps, then it's with that command, you're going to teach somebody else the 12 steps. And when you go to do the 4th step, you have to do this shoulder to shoulder. So you get to take some of your little rocks and relate to your sponsee or your friend or whoever or whatever you want to call it. And then they see, like, through your experience and what you're taking through, that they have the same issues. And that's how it works. So over and over again, eventually the dirt comes out, and like things change.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a very basic portion. I'm pretty sure you guys can't read that, but
no, we could see it. It's right on camera. Very good. Okay. I appreciate you actually breaking this down. It was very informative, heartfelt. It's good to see you living this style of life and wanting to, see, like I always said, you know what you need to do. And if you do this, you're going to help a lot of people. You've already helped a lot of people in the past. And I appreciate you coming out and talking today. I know the other day when you were showing me this diagram, and I talked about having you on the podcast, you then said, I'd like to be able to show this. And I said, let's do it. Like, why not? You know what? Because all this makes sense to me. Mm-hmm. And if go ahead and bring that a little bit more closer. Oh. If practice, because obviously just this last week, simultaneously, 2 people that I've had in my life both passed away. One from suicide, one from an overdose. And one is a accidental overdose, one was an intentional overdose, right? So either way, both of them died. And I just think to myself, like, what could we have done different? Like, what really, me or you, we don't have the power to make somebody surrender to the process of recovery. However, when you talk the talk and walk the walk, you never know whose heart you might touch or who you might be able to help out. And often you use a lot of great metaphors to kind of describe how, your own personal experience has held you back in life and how you want to move forward. So I love it. I love you like I always have. You're like my brother. It's good to see you back on the path. It's good to see you in a good headspace enough to try to present what came to you, because this came to you. Right. Maybe it came to you over a period of time. Maybe it came from all the treatment stays, and maybe it came in the Foxhole. But at the end of the day, it came to you, even like maybe more recently. And you write it out, because I know you wrote it out on paper before to where you could explain it better. And then you wrote it out for me the other day. And now I see you wrote it out again. Tells me you could be an instructor, whether it's in rehab, teaching groups, or with a sponsee or whatever. But regardless, I love when Jeff is above ground, above Foxhole ground. Right. I love when you're on this path. I love you dearly. Thank you for coming out today. Real quick before we sign out, do me a favor and look right into that camera and maybe put some good energy into the universe for anyone that might be watching this or hearing this that's struggling or suffering. Go ahead.
If I can do this, anybody can do this.
And I'm telling you that
it's like it does work. When I tell people, like, if you tell the newcomer, it's like it's going to get better, they have no idea of what you're talking about because they never experienced it getting better. Mm-hmm. And that's why I try and show people where the fight is in the beginning. It's like, you're not going to feel better in the beginning. If you're anything like me and you stop your substance, life gets worse for a minute.
Yes.
And like, in order to make it start to get better, you have to understand where the fight is. And once you understand where the fight is, you start to get traction. And over time, It's like you can see the people that were successful. They're the helicopters flying around in the room. The guys that obviously have friends, they have families, they've got cars. I was a very low bottom drunk, so it was easy for me to see the helicopters flying around in the room, which is just metaphorically speaking.
Yes.
And if you're lost and you don't understand this, I would be glad to help you. So, I mean, I don't know how to tell them to look me up.
They can find me. They can find you through me.
Okay, they can find me. You can find me through him.
Yes.
And like to be helpful is my only aim. Yeah, that's
Wonderful.
Yeah,
Very
that's it.
good. So thank you for coming to the corner. Appreciate you. I love you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Until we meet again in this type of platform. This has been another episode of Peggy's Recovery Corner, Recovery Podcast. If you want to find us, we are in all podcast platforms through audio. And then on top of that, if you are watching us on YouTube, again, please subscribe. Please like and share everywhere. And please also put some comments in the comment section. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll interact with you. Love you all until we'll meet again.